Long ago, in the land of Israel, there lived a young boy named David. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a king. He was just a shepherd boy who loved to sing songs to God while watching over his sheep. Every morning, David led his fluffy sheep out to green pastures. He knew each one by name, Benny, Snowy Fluffball, and they followed him happily. He made sure they had fresh grass to eat, cool water to drink, and a safe place to rest. David loved his sheep, and they loved him right back. He was gentle, brave, and always full of joy. When the sun was high in the sky and the sheep were resting, David would sit under a tree, take out his harp, and play sweet music. He sang songs to God about how big and kind and powerful he was. The wind would dance through the grass, the birds would sing along, and even the sheep would lie quietly, listening to the music of their shepherd boy. David felt close to God in those quiet moments. He trusted him with all his heart and believed that God was always watching over him. One evening, David walked home with his sheep as the sky turned orange and pink. His father, Jesse, stood waiting with a smile. "David," Jesse said, "you care for the sheep so well. You are brave and full of faith. God has a special plan for you. I just know it." David smiled and nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but he believed one thing for sure. With God on his side, anything was possible. One bright morning, while David strummed his harp near a bubbling brook, he suddenly heard a rustle in the bushes. Then, roar! A wild lion leaped out toward the sheep. The sheep scattered in fear, but David didn't run away. He jumped to his feet, grabbed his sling, and looked the lion straight in the eyes. He whispered a prayer, "Lord, help me protect my sheep." Then he swung his sling round and round. Whoosh! The stone flew through the air and hit the lion right on the head. The lion fell to the ground, and the sheep gathered close to David. He patted their heads and said, "Don't worry, little ones. God kept us safe today." Another time, as the moonlight lit up the hills and the stars twinkled above, David sat beside his fire, watching over his flock. Suddenly, snap! A branch broke in the darkness. A huge bear was sneaking up to steal a sheep. David stood up quickly. "Not tonight, bear," he shouted. He grabbed his sling again, prayed in his heart, and let the stone fly. Whoosh! The stone struck the bear, and it turned and ran away into the night. David hugged his sheep tightly and whispered, "God, you are my strength and my shield. Thank you." Even in the dark, David wasn't afraid, because he knew God was always with him. Far away from David's quiet fields, a great noise rumbled through the land. Clang, clang, clang! An army was marching. The Philistines were coming, and they were big, loud, and scary. They banged on their shields, stomped their feet, and shouted loud battle cries. The people of Israel were afraid. Who would stop them? The two armies stood on opposite hills with a big valley in between. But then, from the Philistine side, came someone even scarier than the rest. Thud! Thud! It was Goliath, the giant warrior. He was taller than any man, with bronze armor that shimmered in the sun, and a spear so big it looked like a tree. Goliath roared, "Send someone to fight me. If he wins, we will be your servants. But if I win, you will serve us." Every day he came out shouting, and every day the Israelites stayed quiet. Not even the bravest soldier stepped forward. King Saul watched from his tent, worried and unsure. The army trembled, the people prayed, but still, no one dared to face the giant. One day, David's father, Jesse, sent him to the Israelite camp to check on his brothers. "Take them some food and bring me back news," he said. When David arrived at the camp, he saw the soldiers standing in fear and Goliath yelling his challenge across the valley. David looked at the giant with wide eyes. "Who is that?" David asked. "That's Goliath," one of the soldiers replied. "He's a giant, and he's been challenging us for days. No one has the courage to fight him." David's heart raced with surprise. "Why isn't anyone stopping him?" he asked. "Don't they know that God is with us? We don't need to be afraid." David's voice rang out across the camp as he said, "I'll fight Goliath." The soldiers stared at him, wide-eyed. "What?" they gasped. "You're just a boy. How can you defeat a giant?" But David stood tall and said, "When I was a shepherd, I protected my sheep from lions and bears, and God helped me then. He will help me now. I know I can do this because God is with me." David's words were full of faith and confidence, and when King Saul heard him, he thought for a moment. "Well, David, if you truly believe you can do it, then go. But wear my armor." David tried on the king's heavy armor, but it didn't fit right. It was too big and too heavy for him. "I can't wear this," David said. "I'll just go with what I know." So David walked down to the stream and picked out 5 smooth stones. He tucked them into his pouch, took his sling in hand, and walked toward the giant. The army of Israel watched, speechless. David didn't have a sword. He didn't have armor. All he had was faith and his trusty sling. With each step, David's heart was calm, for he knew that with God's help, he could do anything. David stepped into the valley, his heart steady with faith. Across from him, Goliath towered, so tall, so strong, so fierce. With a booming voice, Goliath laughed when he saw David. "Is this the best the Israelites can send?" Goliath sneered. "You send a boy to fight me? Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" The giant mocked David, and his laughter echoed through the valley, but David did not fear. He stood firm, holding his sling. "You come at me with a sword and a spear," David called back. "But I come in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. This battle is not mine, it's God's, and he will give me victory over you." Goliath sneered, his heavy armor clanking as he stomped toward David, his giant spear gleaming in the sunlight. With each step, the ground seemed to shake. The Israelites watched from the hills, holding their breath. But David wasn't afraid. He reached into his pouch, pulled out one of his smooth stones, and carefully placed it in the sling. He took a deep breath, praying in his heart. Then, whoosh, he swung the sling with all his might. The stone flew through the air like lightning. It hit Goliath right in the forehead, the perfect spot. Goliath's eyes widened in surprise, and he stumbled back. The giant's knees wobbled, and with a loud crash, Goliath fell face first into the ground. The Israelite soldiers gasped in disbelief. David stood tall and triumphant, his sling still in his hand. "See?" David called to the army of Israel. "God has given me the victory." The Israelites cheered, and the Philistines were terrified. Their giant was defeated by a boy with nothing but faith and a stone. The moment Goliath hit the ground, the entire valley went silent. Then the Israelites let out a great cheer. "David has won! David has won!" they shouted, waving their arms in the air. David stood tall, his heart full of joy. He knew that it wasn't his strength that won the battle. It was God's power. He smiled up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, God, for being with me." The soldiers who had once been afraid now shouted with joy and praise. They ran toward the fallen giant, their fear gone, their courage restored. But when the Philistines saw their mighty Goliath lying defeated, their hearts filled with fear, they turned and began to run. The Israelites, now filled with courage, chased after them, shouting loudly. The Philistines fled, tripping over each other, and the Israelites pursued them, winning the victory. It was an amazing sight. God had helped David defeat the giant, and the whole nation of Israel was saved. After the battle, King Saul invited David into his tent. David stood before the king, still holding his sling, his face glowing with victory. King Saul looked at David in amazement. "You did it," King Saul said, his voice full of wonder. "You defeated the giant. I never imagined a boy like you could defeat such a mighty warrior." David smiled humbly, his heart still full of thanks to God. "I didn't do it alone," David said. "It was God who gave me the strength and the victory." King Saul was so impressed with David's bravery and faith that he made him a special promise. "You have shown great courage, David," King Saul said. "From now on, you will be part of my army. You'll fight with me, and you'll be rewarded for your bravery." David was honored, but he stayed humble. He knew that his victory wasn't about being famous or getting rewards. It was about trusting in God. David promised to serve the king, but always remembering that God was his true king, and with God, he could do anything.
And back in the village, oh, what a celebration it was. People filled the streets, clapping and cheering. "David, David," they shouted joyfully. Children danced, women waved colorful cloths, and men lifted David high on their shoulders. And on that joyful day, the whole village sang songs of victory and praised the God of Israel.
As David continued to serve King Saul, they became good friends. King Saul admired David's wisdom, his courage, and his love for God. David played beautiful music on his harp that soothed the king whenever he was troubled. But David's rise to fame didn't go unnoticed by others. People began to sing songs about him. "Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his tens of thousands." The people cheered for David, and the fame of the young shepherd boy spread throughout Israel. As David became more famous, something began to change in King Saul. At first, Saul had welcomed David into his service with open arms. But now, as the people sang songs of David's victories, Saul's heart grew heavy. A bitter jealousy started to grow inside him. Saul thought to himself, "David is becoming more popular than me. What if the people make him their king instead of me?" His jealousy twisted into anger, and soon Saul began to fear David. One day, as David played his harp to calm the king, Saul's jealousy turned into action. With a quick motion, Saul grabbed his spear and hurled it at David, hoping to pin him to the wall. But David was quick and ducked out of the way. The spear missed, and David ran out of the room, his heart racing. David was confused. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why was Saul trying to hurt him? From that day on, Saul's jealousy grew stronger. He tried to find ways to trap David, and he ordered his soldiers to capture him. David was forced to flee into the wilderness, leaving behind the safety of the palace and the comfort of his life. Even though David was scared, he knew God was with him. He found caves to hide in, and he trusted that God would protect him from Saul's anger. David wasn't angry at Saul. He prayed for him instead. He trusted God to take care of everything. Saul was determined to capture David, and he chased him all through the wilderness. David and his men were tired, hungry, and hiding in caves, but still, David trusted God. One day, Saul and his army were close, so close that David could hear their footsteps echoing in the valley below. David and his men were hiding deep in a cave when Saul, unaware of them, entered the cave to rest. David's men whispered urgently, "This is your chance, David. God has delivered Saul into your hands. Now you can take his life and end this chase." But David's heart was different. He whispered back, "I will not harm the Lord's anointed. God has placed Saul as king, and only God can take him down." As Saul slept soundly in the cave, David crept quietly toward him. His men watched in silence, their eyes wide with anticipation. David moved carefully and quietly so that Saul would not wake up. With a small knife, David cut off a piece of Saul's robe. He didn't harm Saul. When Saul saw the piece of his robe, he knew David could have taken his life, but had chosen not to. Saul's eyes filled with tears. "David, you are more righteous than I am," Saul said. "I have been foolish. Please don't harm me or my family." David continued to live in the wilderness, but he was never alone. God was always with him. Years passed, and one day, David received news that changed everything. King Saul and his son Jonathan had died in battle. The Israelite army had been defeated by their enemies, the Philistines, and Saul and Jonathan were gone. David was deeply saddened by the loss. He mourned for Saul, and he wept for the fallen king. After Saul's death, the people lived together, and they chose David to be their king. David was anointed with oil by the prophet Samuel, just as God had promised long ago. The people of Israel rejoiced, for they knew that David was a man after God's own heart. David became their king, and he ruled with wisdom, fairness, and a love for God. Even as king, David never forgot where his strength came from. He led the people with a heart full of praise and worship for God. David made sure that the people of Israel honored God with all their hearts. He brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem and danced before the Lord with all his might. How wonderful it is to be in God's presence. David declared, "Let us praise God and give him glory." The people of Israel rejoiced, and God blessed David's reign. David's heart was always devoted to God, and he ruled with kindness, humility, and faith. David's story is a story of courage, faith, and trust in God. From a young shepherd boy to the mighty king of Israel, David showed us that with God, we can overcome any challenge. David's life teaches us that even when we face giants, we can be brave and strong in the Lord. And even when life seems difficult, we can trust that God will be with us just as he was with David. David was not perfect, but he loved God with all his heart. And because of that, God made a covenant with him that his descendants would sit on the throne forever. And through David's family, Jesus, the King of Kings, would one day be born. And that's the amazing story of David, a boy who trusted in God and became a great king.
What an amazing story of courage, trust, and forgiveness. Do you want to hear what happens next in David's incredible journey? Then don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you won't miss the next exciting Bible adventure. See you soon, friends.